Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Danotage, and welcome to another New World tier list. Um, and this is gonna be weird having two tier lists in a row, but this is another subscriber goal that we hit. We hit two of them. This is it. Unless you guys want to see more, this is it. We hit two of them. I said I'd do houses, and then I said I'd do weapons. So this is a tier list for the weapons in New World. We've got a couple different criteria that we'll go off of. The big thing for this is to really pay attention to a lot of what I have a bias for. So I'm gonna try to stay away from that and expose my bias so that, you know, hopefully it makes more sense. But with that, let's dive right in. Okay, hi everybody. So, let's go ahead and dive right into the New World weapons. We're going to start with a few different things, and we're going to start with some of the... We're just going to go in order. We're going to go from one-handed weapons all the way down to magic weapons. So first, let's start with the sword and shield. Okay, so the sword and shield is interesting. Before like we totally get into everything, and it's gonna come down to, it's really tough. So they all have different uses. I think every weapon has a purpose, and every weapon fits in a situation. And most will talk about, well, everything's situational, and everything's gonna be, you know, depending on this, this, and this. Yes, of course. But I'm gonna talk about how they feel when you're using them, and when no matter what role you're in, if you're in that role where it calls for that weapon, what does it feel like to do certain things? We can talk about tanking, we can talk about healing, we can talk about DPS. In fact, we can talk about these in every aspect of the game as well, because you have to remember that you also have two weapons at all times. So I will talk about how they pair with other weapons as well. But for the most part, we're going to try to look at them individually and say, hey, where does this rank? And how does it feel and how fun is it? So sword and shield is a big one, because it is the main tanking weapon. But it should be noted that the great axe, the hammer, the hatchet, I believe, and the spear they all have taunts, right? So you can taunt with those weapons. So you can technically tank with them. And you can technically do a lot of things that allow you to stay away from the sword and shield if you don't like it. So we're going to look at the sword and shield individually. The fact that it's two different weapons kind of makes it very unique and powerful throughout all the weapons, all 11 weapons in this. But I think it is important to look at what it is. Personally, I really like the sword and shield. It's one of my top ones. Granted, I play a tank, and it is pretty much the best tanking weapon. But like I said, you can do others. There's a few moves I'm not a fan of, but I still use. As you can see in these images, I pulled them straight from my account. There is the you know, stab through yourself almost, the Harry Carry kind of thing. I forget what it's called actually, but there's that, and it's very short ranged and kind of makes it a little difficult to hit your target sometimes. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it does a lot of damage. But then there's also like the leap, there's the shield bash, there's the shield rush. You have the most overpowered ability in the sword and shield tier, which is Defiant Stance, which then puts on fortification, and then if you build correctly, you can get healed when it's done, or you can just pop it and then switch to your next weapon and get healed automatically. It's real fast, it's real nice. The sword and shield is very, very good. I think that the weapon set gets boring after you play it for so long, or I should say the move set. But at the same time, so does it kind of everything. Everything kind of fits in that realm. So I won't think about that too much. Sword and shield itself, a very, very good weapon. But with that, it's very specific to what it does. The fact that it kind of does a big cleave every time you use it is very important to think about. The criteria that I'm going to start grading them on is essentially what's it like to do light and heavy attacks, and does it feel good to hit those, and then what are the abilities like, and how many uses does it have outside of just its main role. I think as far as the Sword and Shield goes, it does all three of those pretty nicely. I will say like I said, it's a little boring after using the Sword and Shield for as long as I have throughout all the different builds that I've played. I've always had a Sword and Shield for some reason. It's just kind of my go-to. But with that being said, it's still okay. The utility for everything, it can be used in any role, in my opinion. It does add some weight, so having a full-on DPS like light armor build, means you probably don't want a shield on, but you can still make it work if you want it to. And then as far as it just works for its role, I mean, it's obviously the best. With that being said, I will try not to dilly-dally too much with a lot of these, but that's getting a little bit of our intro out. The Sword and Shield fits in an A category for me. I think the Sword and Shield is fantastic, and for some reason, tier maker kind of cut off the images, but anyway. Sword and Shield fits in the A category. It's not an S because, well, it kind of limits itself on damage, but for the most part, it does everything you need it to do. So, I give it an A. It's very, very good. Alright, now, let's get down to the Rapier. Okay, Rapier. So, Rapier is something I have not played with too much in the release. I played with in the beta, and I played with it in the alpha, and a couple other things, but for the most part, the Rapier is just not my style. So I kind of have to put that to the side. However, the Rapier is fun to play with. It's quick, it's very focused on a target, but I mean, being able to roll around, especially with like light gear on, and get behind somebody and backstab them, because there's a lot of backstab maneuverability and capabilities on it. The fact that it does so much damage and it can burst damage so quickly is very important to think about. There's so many moves with the Rapier that allow you to get through armor and basically just burn down a target almost instantly. It's very, very powerful as far as DPS goes. But with that being said, it doesn't have a ton of use for other things. So, the big thing for us, we do have to think about, is the fact that it doesn't quite fit into a category outside of just pure DPS. It is also important to note that it is based off dexterity. So, if you're going for a strength build, you may want to keep that in mind. Now, with that being said, the strength build will still you can still build it nicely and have some dexterity in it, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to max out the dexterity. If you pair it with a sword and shield, you can kind of go full dexterity. The same will go with the bow, as we see that later. So you can kind of make it pretty powerful, but for the most part, you kind of want to do like a rapier and bow if you want to collect those. So it kind of limits you a little bit, but it's balanced in a way because of how powerful it is. The rapier, and most people are probably going to disagree with me, I'm going to have to put it at a B. Okay, so we're going to go through these kind of quickly because I know the last video was quite long. The Rapier goes at a B for, like I said, many different reasons. But I think that even if people disagree, I totally understand where you're coming from. It's just not it gets some points docked for the fact that it's not super viable for a lot of other things, but it still does its job very well. So I'm not going to give it a C or a D. So I'll keep it up there. Next up, we're going to go with the Hatchet. Okay, the Hatchet is special. Now, if you're watching this as the video goes out, there's still quite a big exploit with the Hatchet. You basically can go super crazy with your abilities and you just output a billion points of damage. It's broken at the moment. But we're not going to take that into play, because I've played with the Hatchet both very, very good and very, very bad. In fact, right before they released the game, the Hatchet was kind of not useful in a lot of ways. But as of this point, which I believe, the version we're on right now is It's up there. I forget which one it is, but it is they just released the server transfers up, and then they fixed the gold trading issues. So if you know which version I'm talking about at that time, or you know when this video is coming out, you know basically where the hatchet is. It's still broken, but it is probably going to get fixed pretty soon. So with the hatchet, like I said, it has a taunt, which is really nice. It's really good for moving around and doing a bunch of things that, you know, going out and questing. I leveled the hatchet pretty high, actually, even if it wasn't ever going to be my main weapon. I got it to level 14, which is pretty good for as long as things have been going on, and the fact that it's not, like I said, not my top weapon. So the hatchet is very good for speed. It's very good for PvP. It's got a ton of different uses for ranged and melee. And really, if you just want to put a bunch of buffs on yourself, do a bunch of damage, and then switch back to any of these weapons, I think you're in a good spot. So it works great for tanks, it works great for DPS, and it actually is a decent pairing towards a healer. Mainly because you can at least, if you don't have a bunch of strength, you can buff your damage when you're trying to do some damage, like say you're a full focus build or something like that. I think it does a lot. With that, I don't think I have another choice. Even if it's not my main weapon, I still have to give the hatchet its love. The hatchet, I think, gets an S without any doubt. I don't think there's anything that I can really dock the hatchet for, other than the fact that it is very short range. But that doesn't really seem to come into play when you can almost reach everything you need to with some of the bursts that go in through and the speed that you can come up with, and you can use the hatchet with really any armor load, because on heavy it works because people are going to come to you basically because they want to kill you, or PvE, everything comes to you anyway. Medium is really good because you get that damage bonus and you're able to still CC a bit. You don't really get too much CC with the hatchet, but you get like rending throw, which does really well. You get quite a few other things that all do very well as utility and just straight up pure damage. And it can, like I said, it can be used with any type of archetype and any role within this game and any part of the Holy Trinity. So it's got to get an S. Okay, next up, we're gonna go with the spear. Now, the spear is something that I used a lot from levels like 1 to maybe 30 or 40. It was a decent leveling weapon until I really fell in love with the hatchet. And I had a lot of people tell me to start with the hatchet in the first place, and I thought they were on a good track. But for the most part, I had this weird stink in my mouth or my nose. Whatever, stink in my mouth? I don't know. I had this weird stink about the hatchet because I remember playing way back before the game was released, the hatchet was just so broken that it just felt cheap to use. And then they balanced it at the beginning. Obviously, they broke it again, but they balanced it at the beginning, and it became really good. But because of that, I switched to the spear and had a lot of fun with the spear and learning how to use some of the really cool wider abilities with the spear. So a lot of people will complain about the spear being very single target because it just kind of pokes as the spear does. But with whirlwind and with sweep and with so many other things, there are tons and tons of ways to get around single target use. In fact, you can lure some enemies in, do like a sweep, and then pull out like a different weapon and just go ham on them. It's actually really nice. The spear gets a high rank for me. It also has it has a lot of stunning, and frankly, it can pretty much control the enemy pretty nicely. In fact, if you can get your timing correctly, it's a really, really nice PvP weapon. And you'll see a lot of people put out videos that talk about PvP builds with, like, say, the bow and the spear, or the musket and the spear, and I'll show you later, the hatchet and the spear, or I probably won't show you, but you know what I mean. The hatchet and the spear does really well if you just want to put out damage. It's really nice. So with that, honestly, I give the spear an A, because I think it does fall short in the sense that it doesn't really work too much for some roles, but for the most part, it works for everything. You can make it work, but I think it does fall short with the fact that it is It is single target in a way, even if you have those sweeps and abilities. That being said, the argument could be made for S, but I'm gonna put it at A for now because it's just really fun to use. But I think there are other things like the hatchet that work a little bit better. Okay, next up we have the greatsword. Not the greatsword, the great axe. Sorry for the slip up there. The great axe. There is still a stink about the great axe. During the closed beta, there was an exploit, kind of like what the hatchet is going on with, but it was a very different one. The great axe had like this double usage, so you can hit your targets twice immediately, and essentially it was exploited to the point where it was the only thing to use in PvP. Since then, they've kind of fixed it, and it's still used pretty heavily throughout the game. I think a lot of PvP players will use the Great Axe. Very, very strong in that sense. And I think it's supposed to be. So, I will say that the taunt on the Great Axe is pretty nice because it's more of a kind of a narrow cone, so you can get like 2 or 3 enemies if you're really careful and you really pick your spot when to hit that. It has the what's it called? It has the ability is called, I always forget what it's called because I never use it really. It's called no, it's not charge. Charge is really good. It's called Gravity Well. Gravity Well is a nice move that gets used quite a bit in almost everything. But Gravity Well is this, you throw out this actual like singularity and it sucks people in and gets them stuck there. I've been killed by a Gravity Well, or at least been killed because somebody got me in a Gravity Well quite a few times. The one thing I will say though is if because of how many people use Gravity Well, if you can anticipate getting out of it, or if you have a sword and shield and you just pull it out and just block everything that comes to you, you can kind of negate the Gravity Well pretty easily. But you have to anticipate it. If you don't anticipate it, you're kind of gonna get caught, and it's gonna be problematic. So healers they kind of go down pretty fast when faced with a Gravity Well. But then again, healers are able to heal themselves through a lot of things too. That being said, the Great Axe does a lot of damage, especially with Execute. And you can also get a lot of mobility with, like I said, Charge. Charge does really well. It works for tanks. It works for DPS. I don't think it works very well for too many healers. But I would see an argument where you can make the use for it. Again, that would require you putting points into strength and having some strength items, and most of the time you're probably going to need some other things. But for the most part, if you're running light armor, you can kind of get that CC of that Gravity Well up pretty nicely. So it's not bad. But it does have that weird stink on it, and I'm not a huge fan of it myself. And even if I think to put my bias to the side a little bit, I still kind of have to give the Great Axe a B. I know, that's something that's probably going to be very blasphemous, but I really dislike the Great Axe. I've used it a little bit, and I know a lot of people use it. It just gets exploited, and this tier might, and in fact, like a lot of this is just for fun in games because these tier lists are going to change dramatically as things go on and as updates come out. But keep in mind, this is how I feel about them. This is not based on any meta. I'm trying not to base it on meta because, like I said, that will change a lot. So I'm basically using it on use. The Great Axe is very, very slow and doesn't feel nearly as satisfying to use as this next weapon, which is the Warhammer. So Warhammer, in my opinion, is the better version of a Great Axe. Now, obviously, they're very different, right? The Great Axe is you chop things, you slice them in half. It feels more warrioristic to use the Great Axe and just kind of go ham on things. I personally, I have been using a two-handed weapon, and I have been using this Warhammer quite a bit. I like bonking things. it feels so much better to bonk things. The difference is, with a great axe, you're probably going to light attack a little bit more. For me, with the Warhammer, because of how much grit I get from using heavy attacks or charged attacks. For those who don't know the difference, a charged attack is holding the left click until it fully does the attack, or the attack button until it fully does the attack. With the heavy attack, you just have to hold it until it's no longer doing a light attack. And then you can let go. So it's a little bit faster. It does slightly less damage, but you can get out those heavy attacks a lot quicker. Now, because of that, and because of being able to get grit out of it, it makes it a really, really useful weapon for me as a tank and for damage users, DPS users. And like I said, the same argument gets made for if you want to put a little bit of strength into something, you can use it as a healer, but it really doesn't help you. I think a lot of these bigger weapons are not going to help you as a healer. It's more of just you just want to have fun with it. So also that's part of the thing that brings it down in the ranking, by the way, for me, is if it can't be used on every type of role. Which is why the Great Axe didn't get an A and got a B. So for the Warhammer, it does all the bonking. It has so much CC capability. It's got area of effect. It's got giant cones in front of them. It's got the big clear out that just sends your foes flying in the air. The Warhammer is just fun, man. And if you're fighting like a boss and he's pretty stationary, you could just constantly do heavy attacks or charged attacks and just bam, 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 and watch that damage just go up. The problem is, and a lot of people will complain about this, I don't have a problem with it, but a lot of people do, which is why they don't use it. It's slow, because even if you're light attacking, it doesn't attack very fast. Obviously, the balance is there because it does so much damage per hit, so it's meant to be there on purpose, but it hits really, really hard, and I love the crap out of it. I absolutely love hitting things with the Warhammer. It is so much fun. I was gonna give this an A because of that, and because of the roles. It shouldn't be used on really every role, but it is so useful in PvE and PvP that I think I have to put it in the S category. Now, you could call that a bias for me, and I wouldn't fight you on that. That's absolutely personal, but it is just so much fun to use, to just bonk things with. And it is by far the loudest weapon, because you can hear that thing from a mile away when it does its big smash onto the ground. But it is so much fun, and watching, like, if you put a aquamarine on it and put some ice damage on it and just watch the effects go on, you see all these ice crystals forming on it. It's pretty cool. The Warhammer gets an S for me. It's very good. All right, next up, we have the bow. Okay, so there are a few different ranged weapons in the game, but there are a few different. There's only two that use ammo, and there's only two that are not magical. We have the bow and we have the musket. I'll get to the musket in a second. The bow is very fun and very, very good. The one downside and drawback, but balancing aspect to it because of how good it is that it is a slow projectile. So you have to lead your shots. You have to basically be on a server where you're not getting too much lag, which right now is very difficult. But it is something that even if you don't hit your target, there are so many abilities that you don't really have to be super accurate with and still make it work. Obviously, it has a few things to where it helps to grab them, but it's not the worst. It's not the biggest problem if you don't hit it. So there's a move called Poison Shot. You see the little cloud there. Poison Shot, you can shoot right at an enemy's feet or a group's feet and poison all of them. And if you upgrade it fully, you can actually get quite a bit of range and damage. So at the beginning, it's a 3-meter wide cloud that lasts for 6 seconds, and it does 10% of the weapon's damage per second. It lasts 20 seconds. Oh, the cloud. Sorry. My fault. I'm reading the thing wrong. So the cloud lasts 6 seconds. Anybody who touches the cloud now has a 20-second dot. and it does 10% of the weapon damage for those 20 seconds. So that by itself is really cool. That 6 seconds, people tend to avoid it if they see it, but if you hit it right at the right moment when people are grouped up, it works really nicely. The poison shot, that if you upgrade it fully, so if you upgrade it fully, you get 12% damage for 20 seconds, and then you also get an ability that helps you get more damage if you hit the target directly. So that works really well for PvE. In PvP, unless you really can dial in and hit that target nicely, it doesn't really do much, which is part of the drawback for the bow. You have to hit your targets in a lot of these aspects. However, there's rain of arrows, there's splinter shot, and I would say those two abilities are AoE abilities where you can kind of get close but not really on it. So if you're dealing with like maybe lag on your server, that's something to consider. However, you'll see a lot of people use evade shot, and you'll see a lot of people use rapid shot, which they just do a ton of damage. The problem is, again, you have to hit your target, and because it's a slow projectile, it's a little bit of a problem. Now, where does this fit onto all the roles? I personally think it fits onto every role, technically. So if you're a magic user or if you're a healer, let's say, and you are full focus, you can put a little bit in dexterity, you can make things happen and do really well. In the end, you can really just get a really, really nice bow and do that weapon damage for like poison shot. And you can start putting damage out while you're healing. You can start doing a bunch of things. You can, in fact, use some of the abilities to, again, jump back from the enemy if they start to charge you. I think there's a really good use for a lot of that stuff to where you don't even have to make it powerful and still utilize the bow very well. If you're going to be like a fire staff user, it's really nice to get rid of all your mana with your fire staff and then switch to your bow while you go back and recharge your mana. Now, that's the shroud method, using 2 ranged weapons. A lot of people will do that, but I think if you're not like super good at hitting your targets, it's very, very dangerous. I would always keep a melee weapon with you. For me, I use the spear in the bow, and I use the hatchet in the bow, and I'll even use the sword and shield in the bow. Those all do very well in combination with each other. I think it legitimately fits into every category. However, like I said, you have to be very careful. And it comes down to this all the time as being a healer. Healers are very tough, and I hope that one day they do add another healer type weapon, or at least do other things that allow, like maybe the hammer, because it has life suck, which I forgot to mention. You can do all your abilities take life from the enemy and give it to you, which is pretty nice. But if you can get more of those to do like group heals around you, I think it'd be really nice to have that and then have the bow as well, so you can go just straight dex or something like that, or straight strength and dex. However, I must say that even if the bow is my favorite weapon, I still have to give it an A and not an S. Mostly because it is very difficult to hit your targets. However, if you can hit your targets, the bow is by far so strong. I wouldn't say it's the most powerful, but it is so strong. I won't say it's the most powerful for a couple of reasons, as we'll get to later, but it is so powerful for so many different reasons, and it's so versatile. So, giving it a solid A. Okay, so next up we have the musket. The musket is essentially the same thing for a lot of people as the bow, except for you can hit your targets way easier and not have to worry too much about lag. Sometimes you'll see your enemies jumping around, stuff like that. But for the most part, it's really nice to have, and in fact, you can actually pair it with a lot of melee, or you can actually pair it with a lot of ranged weapons if you want as well, because the musket has a tier called Trapper, and it allows you to do a bunch of stuff that helps you stop people as they get closer to you. So with sticky bomb and traps, you can throw things very close to you and get rid of them as they approach, and then you can try to get away from them. You can also utilize stopping power to just put a bunch of damage on them and hopefully scare them away while they charge you. That's one thing to consider. Again, doing it PvE is a little bit different. The musket does a lot of damage, and it does a lot of damage at a very long range because it's not a hit. So most people have said in the past, and I've corrected a few, and as it goes, a lot of people will call this weapon a hit scan weapon. you don't know what hit scan is, it basically, as soon as you hit the trigger and you shoot the ball wherever your cursor is pointing, it will hit the target immediately. It's not quite immediate. There is still a projectile. However, it is so fast that it's hard to recognize. But it is important to know because if you see something going across your screen, you still have to lead it a tiny bit, or at least put it in front of the body so that you can still hit the center mass pretty nicely. So like a deer or a bear or something like that. So it's important to note that. With that being said, it is balanced in a way that it doesn't do nearly as much damage as like a bow can. But, like I said, if you can hit your target more often, well, your DPS is going to be a lot higher than if you couldn't hit your target with the bow. So, with that kind of goes up there. Personally, I'm not a fan of the musket because it doesn't really do what I want it to, and I think I'm okay enough to be able to hit my target with the bow. However, you'll see a lot of people using it for all those reasons. I really just, I don't have a whole lot of fun with the musket. I think it's kind of boring. You just kind of shoot things. It's really not a big thing to me. I kind of have to put the musket at a C. Even if people really love it and go after it a lot, I think it's legitimately just because it's the best weapon to compensate for lag, for server lag. If it wasn't for server lag, I don't think the musket would be used nearly as much. But that's just me. I'm going to give it a C. Okay, next up we're going to magic weapons, and we're going to talk about the fire staff. Okay, the fire staff. By far, without a doubt, you take out all the bugs and exploits, the fire staff is by far the highest DPS weapon in the game. The fire staff rocks. It destroys things. If you can get like the best build possible, you can put out the pillar of fire and just melt people. I've been one shot by pillars of fire before, and that was obviously, I was like level 30 and they were like level 50, but still, did so much damage. The one thing I must mention as well is the fire staff does a little bit of everything. So because it's intelligence based, you can put a couple gems or you can put a gem in the fire staff and have it transfer a lot of your intelligence damage into changing it over for other things. But also, you can work on just putting out any type of damage that you want, really. Well, not type of damage, but elemental damage. And that really does a lot. There are different ranges for everything. So basically, you can just drop a pillar of fire in a group of bad guys. You can drop a pillar of fire as somebody's charging you, as somebody's running away from you, as somebody's going left to right. Like, you can do anything with pillar of fire. If you want to run into a PvE like a dungeon or something like that, meteor shower, which is this AoE that just drops a bunch of meteors in an area, a pretty wide area by the way, and just rain damage on everything in there. That doesn't do a whole lot of damage until you get a really nice build, but it is still very, very good. The fireball is a little bit less useful, but I think it also does a lot of damage and leaves your target burning, which is really nice. So if you get a really nice version of the fire staff, you can put a lot of damage with the fireball. And then you go into the pyromancer tree and you're just like, well, I can kind of do whatever I want because nobody can really touch me. So if people get close to me, you drop the incinerate, which is this ring of fire that ends up around you, and you just burn everything that has charged you and being like, okay, I just sucked you into my trap, and now you're in trouble, and now you're going to just take a bunch of fire damage. So have fun with that. The same thing goes for the flamethrower. If somebody gets close to you or you feel like charging somebody, you whip out that flamethrower and you just torch them down. You can put a lot of damage on there, and you also stack a lot of fire damage as well. And then if you need to get out of dodge, you have the burnout. It's just called burnout. Which basically turns you into a human fireball, and you can get out of pretty much any situation that you want. It goes straight through enemies. It tags them all as you go by them. It's really just an all-around good weapon. It does so much. The fire staff is excellent. I don't use it as much because I don't have an intelligence build going right now, but when I put together an intelligence build, you best believe that so much is going to be focused in building it around the fire staff, with maybe doing something, maybe a musket, or maybe a rapier. I don't know. All I know is it's going to be focused on the fire staff. It is so good. It absolutely gets an S tier rank. Okay, next up, we have the life staff. Okay, the life staff is pretty self-explanatory. I don't have to go too far into what the life staff does. It heals, basically. It heals. And it's the only healing weapon. So it's really hard for me to rank the life staff. I almost want to throw it out of this tier list because it feels necessary for any healer. And anything, well, it is necessary for any healer, but it feels necessary for any type of group activity. Soloing with the life staff is also useful. I would say that if you're leveling by yourself, or maybe you're leveling with a small group of friends, if somebody has a life staff and has a little bit of focus on their build, even if you can't fully heal your friendlies, you'll keep them up long enough and get rid of dots and get rid of debuffs and so much so easily that it will save so many difficult situations. Because as you level, if you stay around your level, like you start fighting mobs that are on the same level as you, or maybe you jump into an elite zone, or maybe you're jumping in ahead in the main story quest where you're fighting maybe mobs a little bit higher than you are going to have trouble staying alive. So if you have somebody with a life staff, or you just have a full-on healer, the life staff does everything you need it to do. It'll keep you alive. It'll do essentially everything. The only problem is you can't really do much damage. So somebody that does a full focus build and a full life staff centered thing is not going to be able to hurt much of anything. So leveling it by yourself and just being a full life staff user, unless you're just jumping in and out of PvP situations, makes life a little tough. So it's hard for me to rank this, but they are doing a lot of changes that allow you to respec your character for a lot cheaper than it used to be, which is very nice. But it is one of those things where it's just a requirement. It's really cool. I love life staff users because they're lifesavers, quite literally. And I don't know. I guess you just have to put it in the S tier because of what it does and what you need it for. I would be a disservice to put it anywhere else. Okay, finally, we're going to talk about the Ice Gauntlet. All right, Ice Gauntlet is this one's tough for me. It's the weapon I've used quite literally the least. In fact, I have not used one in the full release, and I hardly used it in the beta. I saw it used against me a lot, and it's part of the reason I don't use it. I think it's very useful. I think it does a lot of cool things, but frankly, it is easy to avoid pretty much all of their abilities. If you're experienced, obviously you can get caught in like a blizzard or whatever it's called. You can have the ice pylon do a bunch of stuff to you as well. If you're not careful, you can get blocked by like ice spikes or take a lot of damage from ice spikes. For the most part, it is. I feel like it's a meme, even though it's not. It's obviously the newest weapon that they added to the game, but it's been in the game for long enough to where I think they are happy with where it sits. It has a couple of annoying abilities like Ice Tomb. Essentially, if somebody just wants to prolong what you're doing and maybe they're the last one alive and they put themselves in the Ice Tomb, or they want to sit on like a capture point while not being able to be damaged, it just kind of, it's just the Ice Gauntlet's just annoying. It really just is. I know a lot of people that like using it. I can't stand it. I really can't stand it. But with that being said, I think the Ice Gauntlet is something that can be fun if you build around it. If you use it as a secondary, it's kind of, in so many ways, kind of useless. At least in my opinion. Obviously, I've seen people do some really cool stuff with it. But again, it wasn't their secondary. It's pretty very much their primary. People have used Fire Staff and Ice Gauntlet together. People have used the Rapier and Ice Gauntlet together so that you can throw down like an ice blizzard, have it hit around you a bunch, and then if you need to get out of dodge, you can use the Rapier to get out, or you can even use the Fire Staff to get out. But in the end, I hate the Ice Gauntlet. I can't stand it. Now, this is just my opinion. Obviously, this whole video is just my opinion. You may disagree, and I want you to send me your tier list if you can, if you want to, but I have to put this at a gosh darn D. I give it a big fat D. I cannot stand it. It is not my favorite weapon. It is not even close to my favorite weapon. In fact, it is my least favorite weapon. I don't mind fighting it, even if it sometimes gets annoying, because it can kind of avoid everything, like I said, and I don't see myself ever using it. I know that they're coming out with other weapons, like possibly the Void Gauntlet later, or maybe something else, but for the most part, I'm not an Ice Gauntlet fan. You may disagree, and please let me know if you disagree. I fully accept everybody that disagrees with that, absolutely. But it is definitely not something I'm a big fan of. And with that being said, that is my tier list. With the S tiers, we have the Hatchet, the Hammer, the Fire Staff, and the Life Staff. 100% stand behind that. And then in the A category, we have the Sword and Shield, the Spear, and the Bow. The B category is the Rapier and the Great Axe. The C category is the Musket, and the D category is the Ice Gauntlet. I would say this is sort of ranked in the amount that I've used, with a couple of exceptions. But for the most part, this is kind of how I see everything. You can utilize this if you're coming new to New World and joining Aeternum for the very first time, or you can use this to say, hey, how am I going to change some stuff up as I play the game myself, or what weapon should I try next, or which weapons should I absolutely stay away from, because that was my original thought process. So, with that being said, I hope you liked this. I hope you had a good time, and I truly do hope that I see some of your tier lists of some of your weapons. Same goes for the houses one that we did last time. And thank you all so much for watching. Please leave it a like and subscribe to the channel, as a lot of you have been checking these out. And with that, I will see you all next time. Goodbye.